Welcome to the second Terra Fairs webinar, hosted by St. John Fisher College. Today we are welcoming astronaut Robert Cenker to speak about his experience with NASA and give tips about preparing for the upcoming science fairs. Remember to visit your local fairs page for registration and visit terrafairs.org for your latest fair updates. This video will be posted as a blog entry on terrafairs.org, so leave a comment or question on the blog post for astronaut Robert Cenker. Here is Mr. Cenker with his story about what led him to becoming an astronaut.
Is my official mugshot on the left-hand side of your screen. And yes, that is me. None of you in the room, except for your teachers, can find a picture of yourself that's 30 years old. But that picture of me is 30 years old, so I threw up the picture on the right, which you may recognize from the screen that you're watching. I attended the seminary for 2 years. I thought I wanted to become a priest. And it turns out that worked very, very well as an advantage to me, because that included a lot of public speaking, which most people don't get. I think one of the best parts of modern education, or at least when my children were going to school, was show and tell. Just bring something to school and tell people about it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. I'm originally from Uniontown, Pennsylvania. It's about 50 miles southwest of Pittsburgh. It's a small mining town. And, you know, our big claim to fame when I was there was that we were the Western Pennsylvania football champions. And somebody once asked, was I an athlete? Most people think that astronauts were athletes. Well, I love football and I love track. And I was on the football team. But to be very candid with you, the position that I played was first string tackling dummy. Whenever the line needed somebody to practice on, I was the back they would send over so the linemen could practice on me. I didn't play in any games. I went on to Penn State, got my bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering. Your parents can tell you in 1970 the bottom had fallen out of the space business after Apollo. A lot of the programs were canceled. I couldn't get a job. I had a blackboard that was covered with rejection letters looking for jobs. So I went back to Penn State to get more aerospace engineering. I got my master's degree, and then I did get a job working for RCA, discovered that satellites are all electrical, and I didn't know anything about electronics. So I went back to Rutgers and got a master's degree in electrical engineering. And in the course of my life, my career, it's a continuous process. My one son is a network engineer, and he commented once to me that it's a good thing he likes school as much as I do, because everything is changing. And I'm sure you probably already noticed that. Your parents get a new phone. Okay, now how do I make this one work? You're always learning stuff. You always have to learn stuff to keep up with it. And in your trade or in your job, whatever it is you choose to do, that same thing will happen. If you're a doctor, you've got new things to learn. If you're a machinist, you're going to have new things to learn as they come up with more tools and more devices, and they add computers to the mix. So it's an ongoing process. If I could have the next slide, just to give you one more example. This is Jim Polizek, and Jim will be speaking to you over the course of sometime over the course of the science fair projects. And Jim is from the Buffalo Elms, New York area there, and you can see his background. He studied biology, psychology, and physiology. And he also did studies. He was involved with with the Olympic swim team. And I've never met Jim, but I've talked with him a couple of times, and I'm sure you'll enjoy. But again, look at the diversity in his education. If we could go to the next slide. There are two more. These people are friends of mine. And again, look at the education. Biological sciences, microbial ecology, and civil engineering. Mary Cleve, a great lady. She has her PhD in civil engineering. People have asked me, what should I study if I wanted to go in space? And you think of, okay, I should study astronomy or space science. If you talk to your guidance counselors, if you've ever looked into engineering, you'll know that civil engineering is normally associated with building large structures, bridges, highways, those kinds of things. So what was Mary doing in space? one of the things about structures is they're flexible. You don't think of it that way, but trust me, bridges are flexible. They do move. The arm that they use on the shuttle to manipulate things is very flexible. And one of Mary's primary responsibilities was RMS operations, remote manipulator system, a la the arm operation on the space shuttle. And she was very good at it. Mario Ronco, you can see, flew 3 times, and he studied Earth planetary science and atmospheric physics. He actually worked for the New Jersey State Police as a meteorologist. He was a weatherman, because studying the weather is important. And studying the weather from in space, there are a lot of remote sensing things going on in space, and having the eye in space and learning the realities of that is an invaluable aid to the whole process. So you don't have to be a pilot. You don't have to be an astrophysicist to become an astronaut. You have to be willing to study a diverse number of things and to be able to communicate about those things. If we could have the next slide. But going on, think about those educational backgrounds. They are all science oriented, but buried in the back of those science education, communication skills are very important. Every one of those people, every one of those astronauts has to be able to discuss, has to be able to present, has to be able to talk with people to explain what it is they're doing. As a scientist or an engineer, if you can't explain to people why what you're doing is important, if you can't explain to people how you're going to get it done, then you're not going to get the assistance, you're not going to get the cooperation you need. I had a professor in college once who told me if we really, really understood what we were talking about, we could explain it to our significant others. So guys, the answer was, if you really understand your science fair project, explain it to your girlfriend. Ladies, if you really understand what you're doing, explain it to your boyfriend or your brother or sister or someone who really doesn't care. Explain it to your parents. Explain it to somebody else's parents. And when I say explain it, if you think about it, I'm guessing that you talk to some length with lots of people. You don't talk to them, you talk with them. And I think that's an important difference for you when you're talking with the judges, when you're making presentations. Don't think of it as making a presentation. Think of it as talking with people. Just happens to be more than one person, or it happens to be somebody you don't know. But it doesn't change anything. It's still talking with someone. You are giving them information, and you are getting information from them. And to be very honest with you, I think this is one of the reasons why I got picked as an astronaut. I got picked by RCA because as part of my job, I had to make presentations. I had to make design review presentations. And I think RCA felt comfortable knowing that when I went down to NASA, I would be able to explain to them RCA's position, RCA's concerns, what RCA wanted to do, listen to NASA. Well, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do, because there are some things that you're just not allowed to do or aren't able to do or don't fit within the rest of the mission. To be able to communicate with people, to be able to get the job done in the most efficient fashion. So if we could go to the next slide. Since I flew, I've done a lot of that. This is just a picture of me speaking with a bunch of students. These happen to be students probably younger than the folks I was talking to from Salmon River. This is a group over in Scotland. If I go to the next slide, then you'll see that I'm standing next to a young lady. That's a young lady named Amber. Amber is an engineer who works for NASA. Amber is an excellent public speaker. Amber is very comfortable talking with people. The other lady standing up there is the teacher from the school, but Amber and I talked to hundreds of students in Scotland. This was a trip to Scotland, and it was a very interesting part of the program, or part of of the flight experience, if you will, as to what I was supposed to do after I flew. If I go to the next slide, it's not work. Here you can see Amber and I standing in back, and I understand that some of you worked in teams. This is a group of high school students, and if you look in the front, you can see a bottle rocket that they had to build, and the whole purpose of it was to see who could get, what team could get the bottle rocket to fly the highest. Some flew, some didn't. And one of the things that Amber and I did as we wandered around before, during, and after this whole process was what worked, what didn't, why didn't it work? You know, what could you have done better? Within that group, you can see 6 students there. You would get, some people wanted to do one thing, and some people wanted to do something else. And here now goes to my comment about communication skills. Maybe somebody in the group thought they should have done something differently, and they couldn't convince the others. And so they did it the way they did it. Maybe it would have worked better, maybe it wouldn't, don't know. And those are the kinds of things that, as I said, the communication skills are very important in the science and technical fields. Can I have the next slide, please? Obviously, I've done a lot of talking. I'm still doing it now. Since I came back from my flight, I know I've talked probably with hundreds of thousands, certainly with tens of thousands of students, from preschool to senior citizens, and it's part of the program. There are people, there are engineers, there are scientists who don't do that, and they do good work, but they probably don't get as many opportunities as people who can discuss what they're doing comfortably. Notice I didn't say present, I said discuss comfortably. You have to be able to communicate, both talk and listen with people, and this goes directly into your science fair experience, if you will. When you go to the next fair, you're going to have interested people there. There are people that want to know what you've done, and those people are going to talk with you about what you're doing. They're going to ask you questions, but they're also going to be listening to your answers. And you can, if you've learned, or if you think about communicating, you can learn from their questions. You know, if somebody asks you a question about your project, maybe they don't know the project. You know, you folks have spent some time doing this. They haven't. Some of them may be knowledgeable in what you're doing, some of them may not. So you can explain to them the same, as I said earlier, as if you were explaining it to your brother or your sister or your aunts or your uncles or your cousins. It's just explaining it, it's talking with them. And on fair day, it's going to be interesting because you're going to know basically what the people are going to be asking you about. If we go to the next slide, there are 3 questions you will get. You will get other questions that will revolve around your specific project. Whatever it is you've done, obviously there are details or there are things, why did you do this, did you do that? But the 3 fundamental things, and this is really what the science fair is about. What did you do? What did you learn? And what do you want to do next? You know, they're not trick questions. They're not designed to trap you. They're not designed to embarrass you. And the best advice I can give you, and I've said it a couple of times on this slide, and let me emphasize it here, just be candid. You know, don't try to be something you're not. You know, what did you do? You know, I did a project to see how fast a plant grows. And if that's your project, again, you're talking about it. You're not making a presentation. when you talk about a project, I wanted to plan, well, because I wanted this, because I was curious, because I've always watched plants and I said, gee, that plant grew really fast and that one didn't grow much at all. Why did you do it? Is it something that you see? Did your parents suggest it? Did your brother or sister suggest it? As I said, did you pull a subject out of a hat? Did you say, oh, I'm going to do a science fair. I really want to do that, but I don't know what I want to do. Okay, put a bunch of subjects in a hat. Because you can go to websites and get ideas for projects. So I don't know how you folks pick your subjects, but there are a number of ways. None of the answers is right or wrong, unless it isn't true. You just tell them why, what you did, why you did it. What you learned. Did your project work? Good. Congratulations. What did you learn from that? If it didn't work, that's okay too. What did you learn from that? It's always a learning experience. Science and technology is all about learning and figuring things out. So either way you learn something, either way you are, quote, smarter than you were when you started, and you're ready to move on. And that's the last question. Okay, where do you move on to? If your experiment worked, if your project worked, gee, what do I want to do next? What would I want to do? Maybe I want to do more in the same subject. Maybe when I started this, I wasn't at all interested, but in doing the project, I had to do something else. And that was fascinating. It wasn't really a direct part, but I needed it. I'd like to go off and look at that. So again, just be candid with people. Tell them, this is what I wanted to do. This is how it worked out. And you will find that most of the judges, I'm sure all of the judges, will be very open, very receptive to that, because that's what you're there for. You're there for communications. You are there. You're communicating with the judges so that everybody can understand what was going on, what was going through your head, what did you learn, how did the experiment work out. Okay, if I go to the next slide, I'm going to go back to my flight crew. This is the guys in my crew. This is me up in the upper corner, the only one with glasses on. And just below me is Bill Nelson. Now, obviously, you see in my background, I'm an engineer. Bill is a lawyer. Bill is a congressman for the state of Florida. He's now the sitting senator for the state of Florida. Okay, so he got into space, and I can assure you, Bill has excellent communication skills. Next to Bill is Charlie Bolden. Charlie is the other guy sitting on the ceiling. Now, Charlie was a Marine Corps test pilot. He was a career Marine. He wound up as a 2 or 3-star general when he finally retired. Charlie went on to run NASA. He was a NASA administrator for 6 or 8 years. Charlie speaks, he communicates. He knows how to listen to people. He knows how to talk to people. Under Charlie, against the wall on the right-hand side, is Hoot Gibson. Hoot was a test pilot for the Navy, and he was the classic test pilot. Okay, when you think, he's probably the guy that most people think of when they think astronauts, because that's Hoot. But he still has, I remember our first meeting with Harley, with the crew, and Hoot was our commander. And we sat down in the meeting, and Hoot just immediately said, okay, guys, here's what we got to do. And he ran through all the things that he had trained for, he had studied for, and so he was talking with us about what we all needed to do. And I understand that some of you are in team projects. It's exactly the same thing. You're going to pick a person, and I keep emphasizing this, not, quote, to present, unquote, to explain to people, to discuss, to communicate with. And when someone is communicating for your team, everybody in the team should be listening. Everybody in the team should be part of that communications process. And then on the bottom row, you got Pinky Nelson next to Hoot. You got Franklin Chang Diaz with the earphones on, and Steve Hawley under me. And these are 3 astronomers. Pinky and Steve were astronomers, and Franklin is an astrophysicist. And that was because Halley's Comet was visible when I was in space. You can talk to your teachers about Halley's Comet. It's only visible once every 70 years. So NASA put 3 astronomers on our flight so they could get the best pictures or views of the comet from above the Earth's atmosphere. So again, the point here is the diversity in the backgrounds. But they all share one thing. They all have communication skills. You can't work nearly as efficiently. You can work in the modern world without being able to communicate well with people, but you're going to do so much more better if you can communicate with people. So just bear with me. I'm going to let that one go by. And then if we go to the next slide, and some of you, if you were on the first call, may remember this. As I said, some things work and some things don't. This wasn't a science fair project. This was my first radio control airplane, before and after flying. You can recognize the after flying, I'm pretty sure, as opposed to the before flying. And sometimes that's the way things go. And if it were a science fair project, I wouldn't have had a problem with it because I did learn some stuff.
I think we'll stop at this point, because if you would be willing to do this, Mr. Cenker, could you pretend for the next few minutes that you are a science fair student, and what you brought to the science fair was your no longer able to fly plane sitting on the table in front of a poster that talked about how you built your plane, how you learned to fly it because it was radio controlled, and what happened the day that it stopped flying? Would you be willing to do that?
Sure.
Then the students can see that interplay between the judges, and that's your first experiment. When I was in a science fair, I had a project with marigolds. I tested my marigolds to see how did they respond if I had different stuff in all the water. Ammonia, bleach, detergent, fertilizer. I not only killed all the detergent and bleach plants, I killed the ones with fertilizer, I even killed the ones with plain water. So the judges, their greatest challenge was not laughing because I thought I had failed. And they explained what I had learned is I had to go back and figure out how to do watering of plants so that I didn't kill them all. And then I'd be able to do a test and find out those other things. But they said I hadn't failed. I just showed the things I had to learn next. And I didn't feel so silly after that. I wish I'd met the judges before fair day, because then I would have known. So let's pretend with this. So I have come up to your project, Mr. Cenker, and I will say, hello, I'm your judge, Mrs. Wood. I would like to know, what did you do in your science fair project?
Well, I built a radio control airplane because I really wanted to be able to fly this and to show how I could maneuver a radio control airplane. That was what I wanted to do. And I had, before that, with my father's help, learned the skills that I needed to build the airplane. And you can see from the picture here on the display that I built a very nice looking airplane. And then I decided to go fly the airplane. Now, we're going to put parentheses around this because for you young people, we didn't have video games when I was a child. So I couldn't do the joystick thing, and I didn't have that. Now, we'll back out of 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But we knew that flying an airplane, there was a joystick. And you pushed the stick forward, and the plane went forward, down, and you pulled it back, and it went up. And this. So I figured, this should not be hard. I can do this. So I didn't take the time to learn from someone who knew how to fly the airplane. Needless to say, as soon as the airplane took off, it started to go like this, and I went like this, and the airplane did something like that, but then it also started to do something else, and then it did not go well. You can see the end result. Actually, I will go back and say I built a pretty good airplane, because even if you look at the debris, I did rebuild it and I did fly it again. It was definitely salvageable because the parts were in good order, and I just had to replace the parts. But it's clear that I didn't do the prepare part adequately for this experiment. I didn't learn as much as I needed to know about flying it. I assumed it would be very simple, and it turns out it was more difficult than I could anticipate.
Then one of the things you learned was to learn the process that you needed. What else did you learn about things like how air movement affected your plane? Did you learn anything about that?
Yeah, when trying to figure out after the accident, and when I went back and talked to people about learning the proper thing, the person that I talked to explained to me that when the airplane turns sideways, it actually starts to slide down, and so it's going down. And so when I pulled up, it would then turn it even more, and then it would fall even more and more up than actually when you're side. So I learned about some of the subtleties of aerodynamics that we don't think about. This gentleman once told me, he said, you realize, of course, he says, that model airplane that you built is infinitely smarter than you will ever be. And I looked at him and he said, it knows every law of aerodynamics that we can imagine, and it follows them perfectly. You don't. You're right. So it's a learning process, and that's what science fairs are supposed to be about.
Mr. Cenker, I am so proud of you because you didn't give up. You put your plane back together and flew it again.
Yep.
That's the kind of determination that makes a really good engineer. When you grow up, I think you could be an engineer.
You think?
So, the last question the judge asks is, tell me what you're going to do next.
I'm going to rebuild it. I am going to rebuild it. I am nothing if I'm not stubborn. Or words are important. When you're wrong, you're stubborn. When you're right, you're determined. I am determined.
I like the clarification. Now, all the students that are on, whether you're high school project lead the way students who are preparing for your defense of your capstone project, or if you are a middle school or high school student with your science fair project, you will all have the chance to communicate, and you can all close your eyes and imagine yourselves doing that. Now is your chance to talk to someone who, as he said, talk to tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people about science and engineering. Now's your chance to say, how do you do that and not get scared? Or how do you do that and keep everything organized in your head so at the end you don't go, oh, I forgot to say ding and dong. This is your chance to talk to Mr. Cenker. Please.
Competed in a science fair before?
The question was, have you ever competed in a science fair yourself?
No, I haven't. You could argue that my application to be an astronaut was competing in a science fair for the ultimate prize, in my opinion. And I applied twice for that and failed. And then I flew for RCA and applied 2 more times and failed. But it's funny because my son, who has participated in several science fairs, asked me about it. And I said, every time I walk into a new job, and as a consultant, I work for a different person every other year, or every 6 months, depending on the length of the job. And so I go through this whole growing process literally on a yearly basis, almost. So.
What are some good techniques to stay calm during a public speaking?
prepare yourself. And when do you folks actually do your presentation?
March 6th.
March 17th.
March 17th.
March 17th. Okay, so you have 2 weeks. I'm going to tell you something that I learned in the seminary. Okay, and this has stood me well for the intervening for all of my education thereafter. I never crammed for exams. I never really studied hard for exams. I never missed a homework assignment. I never missed a daily assignment. Okay, if you have 2 weeks for your project, I would say take a half an hour to an hour every day and look at it, think about it. If you're on a team, set some time aside with your friends and talk about it so that it becomes just like breathing, because some people will tell you, well, take a deep breath, and those are all gimmicks. In my mind, if you are intimately familiar with it, if you are so comfortable talking about it, then it comes naturally. And the only way you become comfortable with it is by just doing it often. And so, talk to your parents. What do you think? This doesn't seem to be going the way I want it to. What should I do? I am really frustrated. Yeah, think about it. So between now and the 17th, as I said, take some time every day and just think about it. That's the best way to prepare yourself.
If you had the chance to actually go into a science fair, would you have taken it?
I'm sorry, say again?
If you had an actual chance to go into a science fair, would you have taken it?
Yes. They didn't have them when I was young. Experiment with things. My dad fixed TVs. I would go down, we would take TVs apart. I built my model airplanes. I built model rockets. I would have in a heartbeat.
What advice would you give to someone that doesn't have a partner?
It doesn't have a partner?
Yes.
You have brothers and sisters?
Yeah.
Talk to them. Because if you got brothers and sisters like my kids were brothers and sisters, sometimes you get along and sometimes you don't. And so talking to them is really going to just force you, and as my college professor told me, if you really understand it, you can explain it to them. So, and if you don't have a brother or sister, or if they really don't want to cooperate, find a friend, find an acquaintance, talk to your parents. I'm sure your teachers would. And actually talking to your teachers might be useful because you think of your teachers as being over you. So you're going to think of them as being like a judge. But I'm a big believer in just being familiar. And the other thing is, and this goes back to the other question about what I would suggest as far as getting ready. Get yourself, you're not presenting, you're communicating, you're talking with someone. You got to listen and you got to speak. And if you do both, it'll work out.
I think that's a very important point that you stressed, the presenting versus communicating, because often our students do think of it as science fair presentations, so they assume once they have spoken their piece that they are then off the hook, so they haven't necessarily prepared for that questioning aspect of it. So could you give our students some advice on how to prepare for questions that go beyond a basic yes or no answer?
Well, Ms. Wood gave me that list of the 3 questions that you will get. And in the presentation that I just showed you, there are things that you can expand on. What did you do? Well, you could say, I wanted to see if a plant would grow. Okay. You've answered technically the question. What that's going to do is elicit probably more questions. Well, why? Why would you do that? So when you answer the question, and again, this comes with being familiar with it, I was really curious about this because I've watched this in our garden. My family keeps a garden, and some of the plants grow really well and some of them don't. And so this is the reason I wanted to do this. And so there are a lot of things like that. And it all comes down to really thinking about it. And you, as I said, you don't think about it the night before. You don't think of it the day of the present of your fair. You think about it between now and then, so that it becomes part of your, for the next 2 weeks, part of your life. Okay, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. And if you start thinking about it and talking about it to anyone that will listen, is simply a good way to air, because those people, again, don't know your project. They don't know what you did. And they're probably going to have questions too. And those kinds of things will get you to think, oh, gee, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah, this is what I would do. This is what I wouldn't do.
Thank you. Anyone else have any other questions? No, it's time to end. Go ahead.
Is it scary going into space?
Is it scary going into space? Somebody asked me that before, about, several months before I flew. I said, no, but ask me that at T-minus 10 seconds. And it's weird. I can sleep anywhere, anytime, in any situation. I never had a problem sleeping. The night before we flew, I was nervous. I can remember very clearly laying in bed thinking, why are you doing this? You've got a good job, you've got a beautiful wife, you have 3 kids. Do you really want to spend on 4 million pounds of explosives so they can light it? And the answer was yes. So the following day I get up, and I went through this 5 times for the record. We set the record for delays. I get up in the morning and we get on the vehicle, and they strap you in about 2 hours. By the time everybody gets everything ready, they strap you into the vehicle about 2 hours. I fell asleep on the bed because, as I said, I didn't help fly the vehicle. It was like, imagine if you got on the school bus and the bus driver said, okay, we're going to leave in an hour. I said, what am I going to do for an hour? I fell asleep. So it's a very strange, I was nervous coming home too. Nervous coming home was because re-entry is something that's always been, in my mind, as dangerous or more dangerous than the launch. So I was nervous coming home.
Questions about science fair? So we have a bunch of students who are first-year science fair participants. So like I said before, they have completed their first round, their local science fair. The second round that they're preparing for now is the regional science fair that they are going to the local college for. So do you have any tips to help them kind of ramp up their communication or just their overall displays to get it to that next level performance as compared to their first level performance? The first one, they were kind of nervous. For them, the focus for them mainly was on their display and how to explain it. But now this is their second time presenting the information and communicating with the judges. So what advice would you offer just to get it to be just a little bit more dynamic the second time around?
There is a joke. Somebody asked a police officer in Pittsburgh, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? The guy looked at him and says, practice, practice, practice. People ask me how we prepared, how I was trained for flight. We practiced flight day 1. We practiced flight day 2. We practiced flight day 3 over and over and over again. And we didn't just practice normally. You practiced if things went wrong. If you were in the middle of flight day 1 and you pressed this button and it didn't work, what would you do? So, and I keep going back to this, find an ant, find an uncle, find a neighbor. You've got your science fair project. Hey, would you come and listen to this? Would you just come and don't be a judge, just come and listen to my presentation. And if you think of anything, feel free to ask. I'm not shy. It's what I tell people when I do presentations. I'm not shy. Ask any questions you want. I may not answer it, but don't feel shy about asking it. So the only thing I can say is practice. As I said, you got neighbors, you got aunts, you got uncles, you got cousins, you got friends. I'm not going to tell you to go pull somebody in off the street because that's asking for trouble, but find anybody that's willing to listen to you and practice it. Look at my display. How's that look to you? And again, this is communications. You have to listen. When you bring somebody in, if you're presenting to somebody and they ask you a question, you can't blow it off and say, that's a stupid question. Think about it. It might be a perfectly valid question. You may think it's stupid because, oh, I know all about this because I've been doing it. They don't. That's why they ask the question. So the only thing I can say is practice. As I said, parents, relatives are great for that. When my kids were in their science fair days, and that's what they would do is we'd get my aunt, my brother or sister or Barbara's brother or sister, and hey, what's it look like? Give the presentation. Give the whatever it is you're going to do. Explain what you did.
I think that's all we have.
Mr. Cenker, I think one of the most important things you said is find someone to talk to. I found that some kids really didn't feel good about talking with their peers. They did fine with adults. Others said, I'm going to talk to the kids, but how do I tell my parents about this? They don't know what I'm doing, but they can. I've also had students that practiced with their dogs and cats. Dogs and cats are fantastic listeners. And it lets you practice the whole storytelling of what you did. So when in doubt, sit down with the family dog and tell the dog everything you did. And when you're done, give it a treat and it will wait with breathless anticipation for the next time you want to practice.
Yeah, I never thought of that, but I used to talk to my dog. Yeah, that's true.
Now, as we move forward, getting closer to Fair Day, I remind students, you always have the option to continue with your data collection to say, oh, my mousetrap could be better if I did that. Well, then between now and Fair Day, build your mousetrap over again. That's okay. You're free to evolve this because when we're learning, it never stops. We never say, oh, today's the last day I can learn, close it up, put it away, and stop learning. That's not something we do. So instead, look at your science fair day as a snapshot on what you're learning. And you'll be able to tell judges about what you've discovered so far, what you broke so far, what you killed off so far, depending on your skills as a science researcher and what your hypotheses were. But think about how this is part of a process of discovering all the things you can do, discovering all the things you can imagine, discovering all the things that you can find other people that care about it too and they want to help. Because the next idea that you have, the next thing you imagine, now you've created a skill set and people who know you're someone that wants to keep learning. And you keep building your future with what you're doing now. So all that practice that Mr. Cenker talked about, all of that isn't just to look good on Fair Day. It's like learning how to drive a car. You don't get behind the steering wheel on Tuesday, turn the car on and take your road test on Wednesday. Think how long people practice on their driver's permit before they do their actual driving. What you're doing now is that preparation for what it is you're going to discover you do when you're an adult. Okay, is there anything else that you would like to say, Mr. Cenker, to launch this crew?
Practice, practice, practice. And remember, you're not talking to someone, you're talking with them. And that's a huge difference, and it's a mindset. It really is a mindset. When I get up in front of a room with 500 or 1,000 people in it, okay, I'm not talking to 500 or 1,000 people. I'm talking with them. You know, you look people in the eye. And Ms. Wood and I had this conversation that I wanted to see you guys when I talk with you, because I can make out your faces, and I could tell if somebody was sleeping off in a corner, and I'm thinking, okay, whatever I'm saying isn't working here, because obviously it's not getting through. And so you're talking with people. You talk with your friends all the time. You talk with your parents, hopefully a lot. You talk with your teachers. You're not talking to the judges. You're talking with them. You're listening to them. You're explaining to them something that you've done. And if you've done your stuff, you've done your homework, if you will, between now and the actual day, as she said, you might even make more changes. And that's part of your story. Well, I had done this much up until there, but I really thought I could tweak this, so I made some changes. And it didn't work out. And it worked great. In either way, you have something to tell them. So just become familiar with it. If it's something you're familiar with, if it's something you're comfortable with, then you're talking about it. You're just talking about something that you've had a good time doing, and you're just explaining it to them. That's all.
My son was in science fairs for 8 years, and one of the hardest things for him was making the long words that he learned as a high school student explainable to people that weren't training to be engineers like he was. And that was where explaining to friends at church, or making a list of all the words that he was using and looking and seeing how many of them were more than 7 letters. And then he would practice breaking that big word into something smaller, so people didn't go, oh Lord, I don't know anything about that, and just zone off. So when you're learning wonderful new words, if you're a high school student basically doing graduate level research because of opportunities you've had, just remember to bring your words when you're talking to the general folks to where they can understand all that you're talking about. And if you can do that, like Mr. Cenker said, if you can explain it to everybody because you know it so well, then you know it the right way. Anything else, sir?
Nope. If anybody has any questions about spaceflight, though, before we leave, I think we still have a couple of minutes. I'd be happy to try to answer them too.
Does the stuff in the rocket ship really float once you get outside of Earth?
Does the stuff in the rocket ship really float?
Yeah.
Yep. Have you ever seen, I don't remember what the Disney movie was about, but Buzz Lightyear. Buzz Lightyear talked about zero gravity, and zero gravity is falling with style. Do not do this, okay? All of you raise your hands so I know you heard this. Do not do this. Raise your hands. I see people who haven't raised their hands. All right, do not do this. If you had a pet chipmunk, or if you had a pet rat in a cage, and you threw that cage up in the air, what would happen to the rat in the cage? He would be floating around inside the cage, right? Inside the cage, he would feel zero gravity. Inside the cage, he would be floating. That's what's happening to us in a spaceship. We are going around the world so fast that we're falling around the world all the time. So yes, everything floats inside the spaceship. We are not weightless. When you hear the term weightless, what it means is we feel zero gravity. We don't feel the gravity because we're all falling as we go around the world.
What specifically did you do when you were working for NASA?
What specifically did I do? I was technically responsible for a satellite. I was the manager of systems engineering. It was a communication satellite, and it was deployed out of the space shuttle. Now, I didn't technically have anything to do with the actual deployment, but because I was technically responsible for it, if anything had gone wrong, I was the best person to be able to help them resolve that before they deployed the satellite. So I was there to protect that satellite. In addition to launching the satellite, I operated an infrared camera that RCA had developed, which is a camera that takes pictures of temperature rather than light. And that was a fascinating experiment, and that was one of the things. And then everybody that flew on the space shuttle was a guinea pig. So everybody participates in medical experiments trying to understand how this unique environment affects our bodies and our minds.
Any final questions? Evan?
How many other people went with you on the space shuttle or on their Earth?
How many other? There were 7 of us in that crew picture that I told you. There were 5 NASA astronauts, Bill Nelson and I. And if you like to surprise your parents, here's a quiz for your parents. When you go home, ask your parents how many people they think have flown in space. I would be fascinated to hear the answer to that question. Most people, let me put a teacher on the line here. Let me put a teacher on the spot. Can I ask one of your teachers, how many people do you think have flown in space?
Have floated or flown?
Flown.
25.
In 1986, I was the 200th person to fly.
Wow.
Over 500 people have flown in space.
Wow. Is that 500 people just U.S. citizens or combined around the world?
That's combined around the world. But here's another bit of trivia for the young ladies in the room, because there were no ladies on my crew. And obviously in the current environment, everyone worries about that. It doesn't get any publicity anymore. The woman who has, the person, excuse me, who has more hours in space than any other American is a woman, Peggy Whitson. She has spent 500 days of her life in space. That's not on one mission, but she has spent over 500 days in space. It's more than any other American.
When's the next time you fly into space?
When the next time? God willing, I wish from your lips to God's ears. I don't think I'm going to get the opportunity to fly again. I had one chance 10 to 15 years ago, and that one went away. I have tried, as I said, I applied twice to be career after I flew, but I'm pretty sure that ship has sailed. I probably won't get a chance to go again. But I've had my shot. I can't complain.
Have you worked with anyone that has been, flown a bunch of times? That went with you?
A bunch of what?
Times.
Oh yeah, Franklin, as I said, Franklin was on my crew, flew 7 times. And I just saw Charlie Bolden, Charlie, my pilot, flew 5 times. So yeah, there are a lot of people who have flown more times, and there are a lot of people who are like me, who have only flown once. It just depends on your situation. The first time I applied, there were 8,000 applicants for 40 positions. The last round of applications, there were 10,000 applicants for 20 positions. And that's why I say, if you want to do it, if you think you might want to do this, you got to find something that you love, so that you can study it and get immersed in it and really become good at it. And if you love it, you're having a good time while you're doing it, and you will be the best that you can be. That may or may not get you there. There are no promises, but I can promise you if you don't try, you won't go.
Have you flown with any like really famous astronauts?
Famous astronaut? Well, define famous. Okay.
Say like like the first 50.
The first 50? No, Charlie. No, actually, I flew on the youngest shuttle crew to ever fly. We were the youngest crew. There was only one guy on our crew that was over 40. The rest of us were under 40. So that was our unique distinction. But then my pilot was the NASA administrator for 8 years, or 6 or 8 years. So define famous. I mean, if your parents, if they're at all interested in the space program, anybody that you talk to who really is interested in the space program will know the name Charlie Bolden. So by my standards, Charlie's famous. Hoot Gibson, my pilot, his cover was on the picture of Air and Space magazine. Hoot's flown, I don't know how many hundreds of different kinds of airplanes. He has thousands of hours. He is a pilot's pilot. So in my world, he's famous.
I think that's it for questions from us.
Sounds like it.
Mr. Cenker, I'd like to thank you for giving us another hour of your life so that our kids can be using their science fairs to explore their futures and to discover the things they love now. I'm very grateful that you have said that after the fair, you would like to do another webinar that was for all the kids in the fair and their families. And I just want all the students to know you've had this opportunity to meet your astronaut, Mr. Cenker. After the fair, there will be an evening webinar where you can invite your family, your friends, the people in your life that are happy that you were part of the fair. You'll be able to introduce them to your astronaut, Mr. Cenker. So make sure after the fair you get that information. Thank you very much, sir. And Mr. McCabe, thank you for Finger Lakes Community College hosting our webinars. This is a tremendous gift. And I think we're done. Enjoy your day, everyone.